Blessing to be in Sebring, Florida on the Lord's Day. Thank you so much again for the invitation to be with you all. It is a treat. I want to assure you that. I do want to apologize for my family not accompanying me. They would have loved to have been with me, especially my 4 young kids. They were very disappointed that I was going to Florida, number one, without them, and number two, that I was flying. They wanted to fly. They never had that experience. And I assure you, if I could have let them take my place in flying, I would have been completely content with that. I am not a flyer. This is only the second church event for which I have ever done that. There aren't a lot of things in life that make me uneasy, but I promise you that is one of them. But thank you so very much for being willing to let me to fly down here. I did make second considerations about driving, but when I was reminded about the 20 hours one way that would take, I was extra grateful that you offered to fly me down here. Thank you so much for the invitation to be with you this week. As was mentioned, I stated in our theme, I don't want you to think this is going to be a redundant thing at the start of every lesson. That's not going to be the case. But as Kevin stated, and I said at the beginning of class, I know for everyone being together in one assembly now, I do want to mention it at least once, that our theme is on spending a week with Jesus. And we're going to look at some of the most impactful events in Jesus' life and some of the most meaningful interactions that he had with others. And we're going to see some remarkable transformations that take place within people's lives simply because they spent some time with Jesus. And for our lesson this morning, I'm really looking forward to it. It's from Matthew, the 9th chapter. If you want to follow along in your own Bible, Matthew chapter 9 is where we're going to be. And a while back, I was studying this passage, and sometimes when you put everything aside and you just open up the Bible and you just start looking at the facts that are contained therein, every once in a while there's something that'll jump out to you that you never noticed before. And that's the case with me with Matthew 9. You may have picked up on this in the past. I'd never done so. But I noticed that there's something that's very important that takes place, and it involves the touch of a certain person. Now, I'm sure you've heard of the Midas touch. And I'm not talking about the commercials that you might recall on TV some years back. The Midas touch was originally from the king of Greek mythology. And you probably remember how everything he touched turned to gold. What a magic touch King Midas is reported to have had. Well, I'm afraid to report to you, I'm the opposite of King Midas. It seems like everything I touch turns to disaster. So I just try not to touch a whole lot of different things. Wouldn't that be neat, though, if you were King Midas and everything you touched turned to gold? Well, I want to emphasize that he's a mythical king. He didn't really exist. But I do hope you're a lot like mythical King Midas, how everything you touch, it seems like it turns to gold. But even more than that, I hope that either you have or that you will come into contact with the real king, the one who actually has the magical touch. As we look to the 9th chapter of Matthew this morning together, we're going to find that all that it takes is contact with Jesus to cause the blind to see. I'm sort of a backwards type of individual, and so what we're going to do for our lesson, we're going to start later on in the chapter of Matthew, and we're not going to work logically. We're going to go illogically back toward the beginning of it. So I just want to alert you to that. And where we're going to begin is in the 27th verse of Matthew chapter 9, where we find out when Jesus departed from there, and we'll find out where the there is in just a moment. But when Jesus departed from there, 2 blind men followed him. I did this to you in class, and I apologize for doing it a second time. Please put that on the back burner of your mind for right now, because just in a minute we're going to return to that, but we're not going to go into it at this moment. When Jesus departed from there, 2 blind men followed him, crying out and saying, "Son of David, have mercy on us." Now, Son of David is a messianic reference in the New Testament, meaning it's the foretold Christ of the Old Testament, or that's the Greek term, the Hebrew Messiah. And the Son of David, the importance to that is this one would have connection to the kingship of Israel. He's a rightful heir who descended from this ancestor. And so there's great respect that's being showed toward Jesus in this reference. Son of David, we recognize you to be the anointed coming King of Israel. Have mercy on us. Mercy is affliction shown toward those who are in undesirable circumstances, those who are weaker, and an appeal being made to the strong. And so they show this respect to Jesus. We see you as the anointed King of Israel. We're weak and you're strong. We can't see. We want you to help us out. And kind of like in our class, these verb tenses are continuous action, which means they continue to cry out to Jesus and continue to ask Him for His mercy. Now, parents and grandparents, if you have kids or grandkids who ask you for something, and then they ask you for something, and they just continue asking you for the same thing, for those of us who are observing, if you knew nothing else about the situation, what does the fact that they keep asking alone tell you about that thing? They haven't received it yet, right? Even though they want it and even though they're soliciting it. They're asking for this for Jesus over and over again, and for some reason Jesus isn't giving it to them. We find in verse 28, when he had come into the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus said to them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" They said to him, "Yes, Lord." Now, I want to go back to something, and that very thing is that they have to follow Jesus from point A to point B. Now, does this sound like the kind, merciful, loving Jesus that you know, that there are blind men who would like to see so they can better their lives? Jesus doesn't grant what their request is, and He makes blind men follow Him. I mean, how tough would that be if you're blind to get from one place to another? Why would Jesus do that to them? I want you to think about something. What's the whole purpose of our lives in relation to Jesus? Is it not to follow Him? Really, that's the concept. It's not the textbook definition, but that's the concept of what it means to be a Christian. It's to follow Jesus. Jesus doesn't initially give these guys what they want and that for which they keep asking, but because He doesn't do so, looking back where we were a moment ago in verse 27, what's the net result? The blind men follow Him because He doesn't initially give them what they want. You see, He's so tender, He's so loving, and He's so compassionate, He helps them out in even a greater way. He helps these men to follow Him. And it's the trial that they have to face in this life that actually enables them to do exactly that. Sometimes we wonder, why does God put this trial on me? And we spend all this time beseeching Him, begging Him, please take whatever this undesirable thing is away from me. And that's okay to talk to Him about stuff. That's all right to ask Him for things that we don't want to be the case. But sometimes God lets trials come on us because that's exactly what we need to follow Him. That's what these blind men needed. Sometimes God has us to continue to come before Him because He's testing our passion for Him. Sometimes God has us to continue to ask for the same thing over and over to Him because He's testing our persistence for Him. And these guys are about to find out that even though there's a chunk of your life where there's some condition that really wasn't desirable all along, if somewhere along the way, if you can just come in contact with Christ, in the end it'll all be worth it. A.B. Simpson put it this way: one touch of Christ is worth a lifetime of struggling. Now, we don't know how long these guys have been struggling with this ailment. There are multiple instances of Scripture where people were born blind. We don't know if that's the case with them or not. Conceivably, they've been blind for some period of time, but they're about to have that malady fixed. Verses 29 and 30, then He touched their eyes, saying, according to your faith, let it be to you. Brothers and sisters, that's such a profound statement. And really hidden in this, Jesus is explaining to humanity how it is prayer works. And I know this is unique because there's a divine person. You can just come right up and talk to Him. We don't have that today. But when we talk to our Father through Christ today in prayer, Jesus explains how prayer works. According to your faith, let it be to you. Really, who's answering this prayer? Who is it who causes the effect of what is desired? It's the people who are asking it. Now, certainly God has the power to say yes or no, but many times He just leaves it up to us what the answer is going to be. According to what you believe is going to take place. Whatever you said, let it be, one way or another. If you only got the things for which you ask in prayer, for which you were fully convinced God was going to give you, how many things would you be getting in your prayer life? According to your faith, let it be to you. We find out their eyes were opened. How remarkable it is. All that it takes is just contact with Jesus, and the blind eyes of the head can be opened. Oh yeah, that's amazing of itself, but I believe there's a much greater lesson in it than this. And that's all that it takes is just contact with Jesus to cause the blind eyes of the heart to become open, to see the purpose of this life, to see Jesus for who He is. And what's so challenging about it is that we're in these physical bodies and we're viewing things through physical eyes, and there are all these material things around us. And so it's hard for us not to look at life in a material way. And we need Christ's help, not simply to open the eyes of our head, but to open the eyes of our mind and to see why we're here. And even though this is physical, and even though this is material, that's not why we're here. We're here to utilize the material for spiritual purposes. And it's when Christ opens the eyes of our heart, finally we understand what our purpose in this life is. We sing a song at my home congregation. Maybe you guys sing it here sometimes too. It's open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. I want to see you high and lifted up, shining in the light of your glory. Pour out your power and your love as we sing, holy, holy, holy. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. If nothing else in this life, if we can just get that accomplished, we understand then the purpose for which we've been put in this place. That's the significance of this account. Not that Jesus opened the eyes of some blind guys' heads. That's great. He can open the blind eyes of our heart to understand Him and why it is we've been put in this place. Now we find something really interesting in verse 30 of our text. Jesus sternly warned them, saying, "See that no one knows it, how I've helped you." But when they departed, they spread the news about Him in all that country. I want to ask a second time, does that sound like the Jesus that you know? Here I've helped you in the most immense way possible. I did for you what nobody else could. Whatever you do, just don't tell anybody about me. Does that sound like Jesus? This could be an instance of what some refer to as the messianic secret, and that He doesn't want His identity to be revealed too early before it's His time to go. And I understand that's a real possibility. Although here's a second one. Jesus might be using reverse psychology on these guys. You ever use reverse psychology on somebody? I don't think I'm smart enough to make it work. Some people, they're really good at it. And they'll try to get you to think or to do something, but by displaying the opposite of that. And that might be the case right here. Jesus is the creator of the mind. He knows very well how it operates. If you've ever had someone tell you, "Hey, listen, I've got this big piece of blockbuster news. Oh man, it is life-changing." I shouldn't tell you though. What do you feel about that? Well, surely you could just tell one person, couldn't you? Well, okay, I'll tell you. Here's what it is. And I get to the end of it, sure enough, it's something that will change the world. And they tell you, though, the one thing is you can't tell anybody about it. Well, what's the first thing you want to do? Open your mouth, start talking. It may be He's using reverse psychology on these guys. Whatever you do, don't say anything about me. Well, they go out and they tell everybody about Jesus. I think they see it as their moral obligation at the very least, because Jesus has opened the eyes of their head, because He's made contact with them. The very least they can do is go out and tell everyone in their country about Jesus. But when Jesus has done something so much more significant for you and me, and He's opened the eyes of our mind to understand the purpose of life and finally to find enjoyment in it, is there not an obligation morally on us to go out and not just to tell our whole country, but to tell our whole world what the Lord has done for us? All that it takes is just a touch of Jesus to make that happen. With Christ making contact with you, He can make your sick body well. Remember, we're going backwards in Matthew 9. Verse 20, suddenly a woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years came from behind, and she touched the hem, which means just the edge of His garment, probably the robe that He had on the outside. This poor woman, I wish we knew more about her medical condition. God's wisdom is best. He didn't give us more information for a reason. This is about all, just a little bit. We'll find out more later about her, that she has some kind of discharge that's coming from her body for more than a decade. Now, it's Mark's account and as well the good doctor, Luke, and you would expect him to include something like this. The terminology that those two gospel writers employ signify that there's a weakness that she's experiencing because of this. It makes me think of my grandfather. He passed away when he was 66 years old, and very suddenly, about 25 years ago. I was around 10 years old. At that time, it was the first significant death that I'd experienced in my life, and that really stands out to me. But to make a long story short, for several years, my grandpa, he had been really weak. Now, my grandma and grandpa, they were the kind that they worked hard on their 300-acre farm, and they cleared brush for fun. I never thought it was fun to do that. And when they would get done on their place, they'd come to my mom and dad's house on 40 acres, and they would clear brush over there. I mean, that's the kind of hard workers they were. Those last couple years, though, Grandpa, he didn't feel like doing a whole lot outside. There'd be times that he'd get really dizzy, and his blood pressure would drop, and he'd just have to lie down. He'd have to take a nap for a couple hours till he recovered. He had tests run. He went everywhere for 2 years, and the doctors, they could never find anything out. And one day he just fell over dead out of his chair. Well, it turns out he had an aneurysm of the aorta. And the reason they never found it, it was only 1/4 of an inch away from his heart. At that time, even if they would have found it, they said later, we couldn't have done anything. Well, now, you know how medical things are. It's advanced. That's no big deal to fix anymore. But my grandfather, for several years, he struggled with weakness because he had this flow of blood from his body that he was losing within him. This poor lady, she's had this flow of blood coming from her body for more than a decade. And nobody can help her with it. I guess there's a sense in which you could say she's reached the end of her proverbial rope. Well, it's been said, sometimes it takes reaching the end of your rope before you can find the hem of his garment. And she's about to do just that. She tells herself, I just need to touch the hem of his garment. Why is she thinking that? Well, verse 21 reveals, for she said to herself, if only I may do so, I shall be made well. You talk about faith. Now, Luke tells us in his account in chapter 8, verses 43 through 48, this woman not only has had this condition for 12 years, but as well, she's gone to all these doctors, and none of them can help her with it. In fact, she spent every ounce of savings she's had through the years on trying to fix this problem, yet 12 years later, she's no closer than when she began. Can you relate going to the doctor and spending money, and at the end of it, you still got the same problem with which you started? I'm afraid a used body's kind of like a used car. It's like they just accumulate the issues through the years. You can spend endless amounts of money, and it's just hard to get things addressed. That's this woman. She came from behind. She touched the border of his garment. Listen to this. Immediately, her flow of blood stopped for the first time in 12 years. And Jesus stopped and he said, whoa, wait a minute. Who touched me? Well, everyone denied it. And Peter and those with him said, come on, the master of the multitudes throng you, and they press you, and you say, who touched me? Jesus said, no, I know someone touched me because I felt power going out from me. Now, when the woman saw that she wasn't hidden, she came trembling before Jesus. She fell down before him. She thinks she's in trouble. And she declares to him in the presence of all the people the reason she had touched him and how she was immediately healed. And he said to her, daughter. I'm going to do it to you one more time today. Hang on to that. I don't want to talk about it right now, but I want to here in a minute. How he addressed her, daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well. On a personal level and a very small one, I know what it's like to spend a lot of money with doctors and to have the same problem with which you started. A few years ago, I had a really simple problem in my body fixed that probably many of you have as well. I needed a little snip-tuck done on my gallbladder. I had a test run and found it was functioning at 3%. So that's a good indicator it's time to get rid of that dude. I'd had these sharp pains in my side and kind of this dull pain in my back when I'd lie down at night. And like an idiot, late in the year, I went into the doctor to try to figure out what was going on with me. Well, they ran a CT scan, blood work several times, several doctor's visits. They thought because the pain was in my lower right quadrant for a while, maybe I was having some issues with my appendix. Well, a little while later, I found out, and $4,500, by the way, later, they still didn't know what the problem was. And the doctor told me this. He said, "You are a medical oddity." I said, "Thank you. $4,500 well spent." Well, I wanted to get the problem fixed, but I say I'm a dummy because I went in toward the end of the year to try to get it figured out. You live and you learn. And I wanted to have more tests run, but other people were having more test run and procedures done in December. They wanted to make sure to get that done before the end of the year. Well, you know what happens January 1st, your insurance deductible? You start all over again. Of course, my insurance deductible was $5,000. And so I'd spent $4,500, and I wasn't about to spend $5,000 the next year. I told my wife, and I meant it with all my heart, I will die before I spend another $5,000 on what this problem is. Well, it just so happened that we had a child the next year, and I said, that's a good time to take care of the problem. And I got my gallbladder surgery done, about a $10,000 procedure for $150, and I feel like I played the system correctly. There are two ways to play a game. I always play the game to win. Well, I'd spent $4,500 though for nothing. That's frustrating, but can you imagine spending your whole life savings and being no closer to figuring out what the problem is in the end? Bodily things are bad for this woman. Economically things are terrible, but I would suggest to you that spiritually things are even worse. You see, she lives still under the law of Moses, and under the Mosaic system, if you have a discharge of fluid from your body, you're considered to be ceremonially unclean. And when you're ceremonially unclean, you don't get together with the assembly of God's people to worship Him. I want you to try to imagine your life for 12 years and not being able to get together with your brothers and sisters in Christ to worship God. That's a spot at which this woman finds herself. People look at her as an unclean creature because of her medical condition. Do you remember how Jesus viewed her and how He addressed her? I see you as my daughter. Dads, I want to ask you something. If you have little girls, how do you see your daughter? If at any point people would look at your daughter as an unclean creature and not want to have anything to do with her, how would you look at her and how would you feel toward her? People may see you as an unclean individual. Jesus says, I see you as my daughter. You're not in trouble for coming to me to help. I view myself as a fatherly figure in your life. Isn't that remarkable? All that it took was just contact, not even with Jesus' skin, but just with the edge, just with the threads on the edge of His robe. And power goes out from Him, and He heals this woman's body. I would suggest to you, though, there's something much greater than that Jesus can do. When we approach Him with the greatest sickness that anybody's ever had, the problem of sin, we bring our sick spirits before Him, folks, all that it takes is contact with Christ for those spirits to be made well. It's just a single touch of Jesus that can make a deceased body come to life. And we've come near to the front. Actually, it's about the middle, but that's where we'll be concluding this morning from Matthew 9. Matthew 9, verse 18, while He spoke these things to them, behold, a ruler came, a man of means. He probably has some wealth. And he worshipped Him, saying, my daughter, it's fitting, we're just talking about a daughter. My daughter has just died. But Jesus, come and lay your hand on her, and she will live. Now, the faith that people exhibit in each of these stories is amazing, but this one is light years beyond all the others. My daughter is dead, but if you'll come and you'll touch her, I know that she'll live again. Is that the kind of confidence that we have in Jesus? It's tragic that we have to attend so many visitations and so many funerals of loved ones. You know, the thing I hate most, I love trying to be there to support the family. Please don't misunderstand. But the thing I hate about that environment is often I have to look at a deceased body lying in a coffin. And I'll admit I'm kind of a type A personality. I like to be in control of the situation. And I think that's why I hate flying so much. I don't mind driving because I'm in control. I don't like my life being in the hands of a pilot. And when I look into a casket, I don't like it because I'm not in control. There's a deceased body lying there. I want to do something about it, but I'm completely powerless to do so. It blows me away the difference between the human perspective and the divine perspective about death in the Scriptures. We look at death, we peer into that coffin, and we feel powerless. Jesus looks into that coffin, and He feels empowered because He can do something about it. Please come help me out. Verse 19, so Jesus arose and followed him, and so did his disciples. Isn't it remarkable that all the things that Jesus has to do in an average day, it's packed start to finish. He almost never sleeps, it seems like. Yet he drops everything that he can do that day to go attend to the needs of that grieving family. I wish we never had to experience it again, but my guess is we're probably going to have to a few more times in our lives. The next time you have a loved one pass away and it's going through your mind, how does God feel about this? When I ask for God's help through Christ, what's he going to do for me? You got to spare a minute or two, turn back to Matthew 9 and read about how Jesus dropped everything that he was doing that day to go attend to that family's needs. And then reconsider what's he doing for you and for your family at that moment that you solicit divine help. Verses 23 and 24, when Jesus comes into the ruler's house, he sees the flute players and the noisy crowd wailing. I know it sounds kind of weird. He basically walks into a concert in a funeral environment. But if you think about it, it actually kind of makes some sense. We're in the days of iPods and MP3 players and CDs and who knows whatever else. And we can play recorded music. Well, they don't record music back then, so the only music you can have is live music. And so just kind of like when you go into a funeral home and there's this soft music that's kind of soothing that's going through the PA system. It's this soft music that's being played to try to ease the family's nerves. And there's this noisy crowd wailing. Now, this one's really weird to me, but in that culture, for whatever reason, people who had wealth, they would hire those who were known as professional wailers. And I'm not talking about the sailors who would go out and chase after Moby Dick, okay? But these people who were professional criers, and they would come in to help lead their family mourn. That's weird to us. We don't do that, but that's just what their culture was. And so he walks into this funeral environment, and he has an announcement to make. He says, everybody get out of my way. Make room. For the girl is not dead, but she's sleeping. I have a dare for you. The next funeral that you have to attend, just walk in and make an announcement to everybody. Everybody get out of my way. Everybody's wrong. This person isn't dead. The person's just taking a nap. Don't take me up on that dare, whatever you do. But it's the difference in the human and the divine perspective about death. You and I, we view death with such finality. Maybe it's the body being placed in the coffin and the lid being closed and the latch coming over it. I had the honor to do both of my grandmother's funerals. And in the second one, my first cousin's the funeral director, and we were some of the last ones in the room, and the lid was closed, and he said, do you want to attach the latch? Honestly, I did it, really. But I said, sure, it was a new experience, and I did. And I can tell you, that does bring kind of a finality to things. Maybe it's putting that coffin in a box and then locking it. Maybe it's burying it 6 feet under the ground. Whatever it is, it just feels like it's all over for us when that happens. That's the way we look at death. But when the divine mind looks at death, it's, so-and-so's just taking a nap. She'll wake up in a little bit. You know the difference? We're powerless when death occurs. But a divine being is empowered. And so Jesus has arrived and said, everybody get out of the way. She's not dead. She's just taking a nap. Let me go in there and I'll wake her up. No big deal. Verse 25, when the crowd was put outside, he goes in and he takes the little girl by the hand. That's contact. And the girl arises. One moment she's as dead as a doornail. The next moment her vessel is filled with life. What's the difference? Jesus has touched her. That's the only difference. And when that in which there is inherent life contacts that which is dead, there's no way that which was dead can continue to be dead. That which was dead has to come to life. There's something much more important, though, than Jesus touching a dead body and the dead body coming to life, and that's the Spirit of Jesus making contact with a dead spirit, and that spirit comes to life. But here's the issue. We don't have the Spirit of Jesus literally right in front of us, so how do we make contact with that? Romans chapter 6 explains in verses 3 through 5, do you not know that as many of us as were baptized into Christ Jesus, that's contact, were baptized into His death, we contacted Him. Therefore, just as we were buried with Him in baptism, we shall also be raised with Him to walk in newness of life. Even when you're dead. When you contact that in which there is inherent life, there's no way that you can walk away dead. Have you contacted the one in whom inherent life is found with your spirit when it's dead? Because if so, there's no way that you can't walk away with life. As you might be able to guess, verse 26, the report of this went out into all that land. And when news about Jesus begins to spread, all it takes is just touching Jesus, and these most amazing things happen. You find events like this in Luke chapter 6, verses 17 through 19. A great multitude of people from all Judea and Jerusalem, and even to the northwest and Tyre and Sidon, they came to hear him and to be healed of their diseases, as well as those who were being tormented with unclean spirits, and they were all healed. How? The whole multitude sought to touch him. For everyone who did so, power went out from him and healed them all. Folks, that's the significance of coming into contact with Jesus. Jesus can touch the blind eyes of a person's head and make them see. Jesus can touch a sick body and make it well. Jesus can touch a dead body and make it live. But much more importantly for you and me, Jesus can touch the blind eyes of a heart and cause them to be open. Jesus can touch the sick soul of a person and make it well. Jesus can touch the dead spirit of a person and make it live. So that whatever the problem is with your spiritual entity, contact with Jesus can fix that today. Have you made that contact with him, dying to your will, being buried with him in the grave of baptism in which you contact him? And even though your spirit went into that grave dead, it can't leave it dead. It comes out full of life. Have you come into contact with Jesus your Lord? Galatians chapter 5 refers to those in verse 4 because they'd cast off somewhere along the way the will of Christ. They had been severed from Jesus. You know what the significance of that statement is? If you've been cut off from Jesus, you're not touching him anymore, even though maybe you have been baptized at some point in your life. And if you're not in contact with the one in whom inherent life is found, that can only mean that you're dead. But Romans chapter 11 says in verse 23, nevertheless, if people do not continue in unbelief, they can be grafted into the wild olive tree again, which represents Jesus. That's contact. And they can live a second time, and they can remain in contact with him the rest of their lives. You may look at your life right now, and you may think, well, I'm so far away from Jesus, I don't know that I could ever find him. Or you might think concerning yourself, he has to be so far away from me, I don't think I could ever touch him. Well, I ask you to reconsider this. If two blind men can find their way to Jesus, do you think you, being able to see, might be able to do so? If the body of a dead girl can find her way to Jesus, do you think a living body might be able to do so? Do you think a woman who has absolutely no strength and has been miserable for 12 years, who musters all of her strength to get as close to Jesus as she can, and Jesus makes sure he gets close enough to her that she can at least brush the edge of his garment? Do you think in your more strengthened state than her, that if you do all that you can to get as close to Jesus as you can, do you think he might make sure to pass close enough to you so you can at least touch the end of the threads that are found on his robe? Could you use the magical touch of the real King in your life this morning? If not, come to his presence. He'll make sure that you find him while we stand and sing.